All right. Official now. You'll be on YouTube, or at least the teaching will be. uh, Someone once said, and I'm not sure who it was, and this will bring some of you guys back to especially if you're dropping in for the teaching. Somebody once said that religion is for those who are afraid of hell, and spirituality is for those who have been there. I think that's that's pretty good. Religion is, it's not totally correct, but it does sort of catch it. Religion is for those who are afraid of hell, and spirituality is for those who have already been there. And chances are, if you're at this, you're here today, you've already been through hell. The drawing again was an engraving of the entrance to hell, and those first lines of Dante's Inferno, where he said, "Nel mezzo del cammin de nostra vita," he says, um, in the middle of the road of my life, I found myself in a dark wood, the true way, completely lost. Yeah. And so um, uh, Dante had been through hell. He had been through the hell of living in Florence, losing the woman he loved, Beatrice, to plague, and then getting expelled, exiled to Florence because he was on the wrong side in a political deal, and uh, never to return to Florence. And so bumping around different places for the last 15 years. But that allowed him to go through that hell, allowed him to write the Commedia. And, he was definitely talking about a spirituality there that comes from the second half of life. You've got to go through heaven, go through hell, climb the 7-story mountain of purgatory. That's how he saw it. That's where Merton got the title for his first autobiography. It was a biography. He had been through hell. Merton had been through hell in the first 27 years of his life, and then in the second 27 years of his life in the monastery, he was purging himself and clearing his vision to where you could actually see heaven. One great Zen master said, "You can't avoid paradise. You can only avoid seeing it. It's all around us. It's not later. It's not elsewhere, but our vision." And the part of the sitting that we do it both before and after, and then throughout our whole life, is a kind of purgative practice. Sometimes it definitely feels like that. Sometimes it might feel like hell. Sometimes you get a little glimpse of heaven, but it's basically a mature second half of life um, purgative practice. So what I have for us for this, 45 minutes, it's nice to be able to stretch out and do a little bit of longer teaching, is a poem which most of you should have. It's called Your Sacred Dance. And I'm going to read the poem, and then we really have like three sets of questions that come from the poem. And but we'll do the poem first. And if you don't have this poem or didn't get this poem first by some measure, it'll be printed for you. Well, actually, it won't be there on Monday, but you can let me know if you really want it. If you have the book allowing, you have a version of this poem. It's called Your Sacred Dance. Your Sacred Dance. My dear friend, your survival dance ended today. From now on, each of your days will be a day of presence, a day where being is your only purpose, and the sacred dance will be your way to love your soul and all sentient beings. So dance till the bandages fall off. Dance until the grace of God pours forth. Dance until all the wounded healers are healed. Dance your sacred dance. Dance, dervish, dance. My dear friend, your survival dance ended today. Now, it would be great if we just got that announcement from from God or the universe, and they just sort of we got it uh, on our messages on the phone. You know, my dear friend, your survival dance ended this day, ended today. Yeah, but we don't. It doesn't happen that way. But it would be nice, But it's a very this passage. Jung coined the term the two halves of life. Carl Jung, a depth psychologist, but it's been known. Dante was talking about it. The passage from the first to the second half of life is not clear. It's not like somebody just tells you, "All right, you're through that. Start this." No, it doesn't work that way. It's like in a dark wood. You don't know what's going on sometimes, but you are suffering. That's one thing that all the traditions talk about. This logo behind me of Jesus suffering on the cross, and then the first noble truth: life is suffering. That's there's a little bit more to that line from that translation from Sanskrit, but they both are saying the same thing. Suffering is the doorway into something else. It's not the end in itself. It's not something thrown at you by some God just to mess you up or just to punish you. It's not that at all. It's a doorway. Uh, if you can appreciate that, you see. So I want to sort of move to that and look at this first half of life and sort of what it's like. You can get stuck in it and live out. I don't care if you live to be 103. If you live to be 103 in the first half of life and never get to the second half of life, so-called, well, you're coming back from a Tibetan point of view. That they're the kindest guys I know. The most unkindest people I know are people say, well, you'll go burn in hell for the rest of your life. I don't know where they got that idea, other than it's about the scariest idea you can come up with. This idea of you will go to some place and suffer for all eternity. I grew up with that idea. It does focus the mind, but it's not anywhere in Christianity, not anywhere there. It was made up as an ultimate kind of terror to get people to conform, probably, But so let's look at these two halves of life, and the whole idea of this teaching, and then also uh, the practice many of us have been doing together for a long time. Some of us is that this is the basic practice of a kind of spirituality. That's a mature spirituality, a spirituality for the second half of life. And, I read the Baltimore Catechism growing up, and it was, it was what it was. But there's some good stuff in it. But you outgrow that, hopefully, and you keep growing. So we're going to look at the questions that come from both halves of the life. And then we'll focus on the second half of life and there's basically two tasks in the second half of life. And then finally, hopefully end up with what a mature second half of life spirituality might look like, which is, the whole point. Okay. So questions for the first half of life. Um, we're born. It's a great trauma. For starters, the books about trauma are not for just people who have some kind of special trauma. We're all trauma survivors. We all lost the home in our mother, which was in some ways totally great. And there we are. We're from this incredible comfort zone of being in our mom, low lighting, food on demand, waterbed, all of a sudden through lots of, surprises, like all of a sudden this thing I trusted, sort of emotionally trusted, starts trying to crush me at 100 pounds per square inch. We're swept out of the water world into the air world. We take our first breath, you know, start crying. All these big people running around. We're in the Astrodome now, a lot bright lights. I mean, it's trauma for everybody. I mean, that's just it. And then other traumas, follow, unfortunately, some more than others for people, but this is the beginning. So we're traumatic, but we have an operating system loaded into us that will kick in. And we start figuring out how we're going to survive. How can I enter the world, this big world? How can I enter this world? That's the first thing. How can I survive in this world is the first programs for running for survival. Okay. Uh, and we do have that wetware in there. And so it comes on. This is our first operating system. It would be our childhood operating system. We want to survive. We want to get affection and esteem. We're pretty smart. It's a pretty good program because it says if mom likes me, she's going to feed me. Mom doesn't like me, I'm in trouble. And then I got siblings. I got this guy called a father, may or may not be there, but mom likes me, she'll feed me. So then we're looking for affection and esteem. We're working that part of the program. And then when we get to be 2 or so, then we want, we're working our power and control thing, like, no, me do it. I don't want to be fed anymore. And so that whole terrible 2 thing, from a parent's point of view, is just we're trying to find out, do I have any power here? We lay there for a couple of months, we can't even turn over. No other animal goes through that. No other mammal goes through that. They're up and running. We're not. So we need this program. Again, survival, affection and esteem, power and control. That's how we survive. And you got to love it. We're all here. We made it. We made it. And so the problem is we just keep running on that program. And it was a program in a very, to deal with our family of origin and to make it out of there. So some other questions come up. How do I separate from this family? How do I separate from my parents? How do I create my own relationships? How do I forge a career? These are all questions from the first half of life. How do I forge my own identity? And basically, the big question of the first half of life is, what is the world asking of me? These are all questions we all go through, and they're necessary. When Richard Rohr went into a Catholic church in India on his first trip to India, it was Catholic church. It had 4 windows, 4 stained glass windows, in the 4 parts of the north, south, east, and west part of the church. And he didn't know how to relate to it. He said, he asked himself, "Is this a Catholic church?" Because it wasn't, the saints and all the normal stuff you see in the stained glass if you go into Catholic churches. And he asked the guy, he said, "What's with the stained glass?" He had the Indian priest there, and he said, "These are the 4 stages of life. You got to understand the Hindu culture, the oldest, maybe the oldest formal religion that we have on the planet, the Hindus, much older than Buddhism came out of it, much older than Buddhism, much older than Christianity." They said, well, there's these 4 stages of life. They had studied this thing a lot longer than we have. And they said, so the first stained glass window was a young boy carrying his school books. This is the first stage of life. And all the foliage is the foliage of spring, the beginning of life. You start to, get educated, start to learn stuff. How do I deal with, how do I deal with all of this? What is the world asking me? So you go to school. The second one, which has the foliage, has the environment of summer, shows him married and he's got kids of his own, and maybe he's sawing some wood, maybe he's a carpenter, or maybe he's doing something else. It has his career, his vocation. Okay, so that's spring and summer. And then the third one, which is fall, has him older, and he's graying. Maybe he's there with his wife, and the kids are not there. This is the beginning of the second half of life. We think this is something we made up, the empty nest syndrome, but this is another season of life. And this is fall. The leaves are falling, leaves are on the ground, and et cetera, et cetera. And then the last one is he's older and he's got a staff and he's walking alone. And it's winter, which is uh, the the last season there, and so that's he's on pilgrimage there, and so these are phases. And so those first two windows, first half of life, the Hindu culture knew that, and then the second phase is this, and people still to this day go on long pilgrimages across India to sacred sites and whatever. Our pilgrimage, the pilgrimage of the second half of life, is to make a pilgrimage to your true self. That's what we're walking to. The Camino de Santiago, or these sacred pilgrimages that they have all over the world, those are stand-ins for. It's not about getting to the cathedral in Santiago. It's about you're walking towards yourself, your true self. You're walking towards what can be found in the second half of life. Yeah. So the first half of life, what does the world ask of me? Okay. So now the questions start to change in the second half of life, if you get there. And unfortunately, you can live a long time and you're still working on the childhood program. You don't even know there's anything more to get to, but there is. And then you're just, you're trying to, you're trying to worry about your own survival. That's not bad. But then how to get everybody to like you, affection and esteem, and then power and control. The ego runs, and that's the ego's program. That's the egoic operating system. Nothing wrong with it. And no, you don't think about getting rid of your ego in that program. No, because if you didn't survive, you walk in front of a bus. Well, game over for this incarnation. That would be foolish. Now, what happens is just the same thing that happens with your cell phones and your computer. You hear from whoever your, Apple or whatever, and they say, time to upgrade your operating system. And so when you get an upgrade, if you're lucky, when you get in the second half of life, it's a process of upgrading your operating system, which doesn't mean you throw out all the previous operating system. You save what works, the parts of the ego that keep you alive, deal with things like paying the rent and things. Yeah, you keep that, but all that other stuff, the new operating system is not based on survival. That's why I said your survival dance ended today. That's that whole program. It's really about survival. And then they go a little further, how to, make a name for yourself and maybe get power and money and all that stuff. But basic survival is what that is. Well, it gets upgraded to your sacred dance because you're going towards the sacred. And they have different questions. W.H. Auden, great British poet, he had a verse from a longer poem, and he talks about the problem of going from the first half of life to the second half of life. He said, we would rather be ruined than changed. Boy, that is the truth for almost every human being. We would rather be ruined than changed. We'd rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. A lot in that. That is a kind of pivotal thing there, because there's a lot of illusions we have about life and ourselves in the first half of life. And that is part of the suffering that goes on, and the pivot there to the second half of life is those illusions are illusions, they are delusions, and they're not that real, so they will fall apart. I spent a lot of my life duct taping them together. holding it together, holding those illusions about everything, myself, what my marriage was, what my marriage wasn't. We're talking a little bit more about it. We're going to focus on relationships tomorrow. Uh, if you show up for heart to heart, but you can spend your life duct taping yourself together because it's meant to fall apart. You Pema Chodron, whose birthday was this week, by the way, she's 85 now. She said conventional Republican wisdom is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Republicans always like to say that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And she says conventional Buddhist wisdom is if it is broke, don't fix it. Your life, those illusions are meant to break down. The first half of life is all those things, and it works. Somewhere as you get in your 50s and 60s, that program just was meant for childhood and getting out of the family in one piece. And so you're still running it. It doesn't really work so much for having a relationship. It doesn't really work so much for delivering happiness. It can't deliver real happiness. And so it's meant to fall apart. Yeah. But I kept duct taping it together, So, there's something about us, there's something about human beings who would rather be ruined than changed. Would rather die in their dread than climb the cross of the moment. That's a very interesting image by Auden. Climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. Pema's teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, said, when you're really disillusioned with life, you're on the edge of breaking through. See? So that is the challenge, because nobody likes to change, but this is a big change. So different questions for the second half of life start to come up, especially if you're on the verge of retirement, or maybe you did retire, because in our culture, your job becomes your identity. People, if you meet somebody the first time, there's, what do you do? So the questions in the second half of life are of a different nature. Who am I? Now that, I'm not a classroom teacher anymore. Now that I'm not the vice president anymore, you lost the job. Apart from your job and all your roles, all of a sudden your wife dies. All of a sudden your husband dies. Now you're a widower or widow. Your role changes radically. Who am I now? Who am I now? Who am I now when I don't have to get up and go to the office? So who am I we worked with that question a couple of weeks ago on Sundays. It's a great question, but second half of life question. That's why most of you are not like 20 here, 20 somethings here, because, you're just creating these images of who you are. That's part of the first half of life. But when you get the second half of life, who am I really, apart from all that? Then another big question is, am I related to something infinite? That question doesn't necessarily come up in the first half of life, although it might. But it usually happens as you get older. Thomas Hardy once wrote in a letter to a friend, because a mutual friend died, and he said, all of a sudden, the thin red line has gotten thinner. There was a movie by Terrence Malick called The Thin Red Line. He got it from the Hardy quote. Somebody close to you dies. You might have the misfortune of, when you're like 12 years old, your father dies, your mother dies, both die in an accident. These are traumas that, really, and then, you don't even know how to ask the question, but what's happening there is all of a sudden the thin red line got thinner. And that happens more the older you get. You keep getting these chances. The older, my grandmother died at 96. Almost all of her friends from life died, and even some of her children had died. The thin red line gets thinner. And then, if you're lucky, the question comes up, well, am I related to anything infinite or eternal or not? That's a good question. That's a second half of life question. Now, another second half of life question would be, does this path I'm walking now enlarge me or diminish me? Does this path I'm walking now enlarge me or diminish me? That's always a question we could ask even in the first half of life, but we don't think we have a choice in the first half of life. We don't think we have a choice. And sometimes economically, we don't in this world. But in the second half of life, like most of us, here you had the choice to come here and spend 4.5 hours. So chances are this is a question that's live for you. Does this path I'm walking right now, does it enlarge me or diminish me? And then uh, another great question that just formulated a couple weeks ago for me. I never really uh, thought about this question in this terms. This is a moment by moment question. Am I tasting life or am I judging it? That's a second half of life question. I spent most of my life judging every moment and everybody in every moment, most of all myself. But that's a second half of life question. Am I tasting life or am I judging it? Man, that's a profound question. It's for anybody. And then, like in the first half of life, um, all the questions revolve around what is the world asking of me? Now, the second half of life, all those questions revolve around a central question, which is, uh, what is my soul asking of me? Right in the center of this poem is, and the sacred dance will be your way to love your soul. Um, the soul is almost a word we don't use anymore. And, psychology, interestingly enough, psyche, the Greek word for soul, psychology should have been the study of the soul. And now it's not for various reasons, on the way, science and religion have, and both of those have somehow de-souled our world. We don't even talk about the soul. We think it's, we've been given bad models of it. My idea of the soul growing up in the Catholic school was sort of like a spiritual report card. When you goofed up or made mistakes, demerits, and then when you did good stuff, pluses, and then when you died, it sort of went up to the principal's office, got evaluated, and then you went one way or the other. That was basically it. Well, that's not an ancient view of the soul, and it's not the wisdom traditions don't see it there. The soul is, and we'll talk more about it if you're here tomorrow when we talk about how do you have a soulful relationship with anything, a work, with people. How do but really all these questions in the second half of life revolve around what does the soul ask of me? And so it's really hard to even formulate that question if you don't have any sense of what the soul is, and that there could be a thing called the soul, and what would that be like? See, that's why I say you get a chance to love your soul. I mean, very simply, and we'll flesh it out a little bit more tomorrow. But the soul is that force. None of the soul in our way of speaking is a noun. So then it becomes a thing you have. It's not that at all. It's a life force from the cosmos that is um, impelling you um, to grow. Yeah, the Hasidic Jews, you had a saying. They said, "Over every blade of grass are two angels, whispering, grow, grow, grow." You know, there's a true sense when at some point you have to realize that we've all been walking in shoes that are too small. And actually, they bind your feet in some of those old traditions in China and Japan. They bind the girls' feet. Uh, till they can't grow. But we're all walking in baby shoes until we get an upgrade on our operating system. The operating system of the mind and strategy for the first half of life is absolutely appropriate, but at some point you upgrade to the operating system of the heart. We'll talk about that. We have talked about that if you've been in on this conversation. The operating system of the heart is, it operates differently. For one thing, the operating of the mind is always measuring you, everybody else. You're just always measuring. How far do I have to go to get this? How many more years till I retire? Measuring. And then the operating system of the heart is more like a compass. It's directional. And you look at a compass, it orients you to north, magnetic north. It orients you to your true center, the true self. It's what it orients you. And then you can find your way out of this dark wood, but it's a different operating system. Yeah. So even to think about this starts to open you to another operating system, because none of these thoughts, am I related to the infinite or something eternal or not? That thought cannot be. Guys who try to work it out with their mind say, well, there's no proof for that. Yeah, but the line keeps getting thinner, the red line keeps getting thinner, and those questions are meant to come for human beings. They're heart questions. So now if you really look at when you're in the second half of life, if you really embrace the second half of life and you say, yeah, I need another program here, because what I did for 65 years before I retired, it didn't work. It didn't work the last 10 years anyway. If you're in a job and you just go and you're exhausted every day, it's probably not because the job's any harder. It's because your heart's not in it anymore. If your heart's not in your own life, you're in trouble. You got to get the heart into it. So let's look at the two major tasks of the second half of life. There's two things you got to do to actually start tasting this thing rather than bitching about it. Rather than judging it. If you want to really taste this new thing at being 71 or 80, or Pema was 85 this week, she's still tasting it. She's great. Two major tasks. The first major task, I think anyway, is you have to discover your own personal authority. You have to discover your own personal authority. The first half of life, we start out with mom, dad, the family, the culture, but basically the family and mom and dad, they are the authorities, and what they say goes. And it is that way. Certain things you can't do. You have to shave off parts of yourself. It doesn't, these external authorities. And that's just the way it is. But we get stuck in that. And we're always looking for validation from out there. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but you're going to your own personal authority. It's exactly what Jesus meant when he said to Thomas in the Gospel of Thomas. He said, because all the apostles were all looking for Jesus to pull themselves out of the fire, pull some rabbit out of the hat to save them. They're laying this stuff on Jesus. Oh, you're the Messiah, you're the Savior. And Thomas, who was maybe the only guy who could hear this because he was a sixth and he was skeptical. And but yet he really thought Jesus was going to be the one who was going to pull him out. He was the external authority figure. Sixes will do that. They're skeptical of authority, but then they desire this authority. Somebody else knows. The hell, I don't know. And which is sort of true. And so he said, Thomas, he said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So this is clearly saying it's in you. It's consistent with Jesus's whole teaching. It's consistent with the Buddhist teaching. It's consistent with wisdom teaching the sense that there's an inner knower in there, an inner authority, and that's what it means to move from the first half of life to the second half of life. I know it'll have to do with having a kind of mature spiritual practice to sort of develop this, but you're committed to find out what's really true, experience what's really true, and then live by that. That's what it really means to develop your own personal authority. It doesn't mean you think you know more than anybody else, but it just means I'm going to find out what's true experientially. Everybody's been telling me, give me all these rules, and that works for a while. You got to do that for kids. But as you're going to the second half of life, you want to find your own truth, and when you find it, when you discover it experientially, when you taste it, it's what the Buddhists call the one taste. When you really taste that experience as your own truth, then the second part is you live a life according to that. And I don't care what anybody else says. Other people can disagree. They can call you a fool. They can put you in jail or whatever. But when you really go with personal authority, that's Jesus on the cross. That's Buddha under the tree. They were looking for that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is you forge your own personal spirituality that comes out of it. That's the second part. Once you found this truth, maybe it helps you find the truth, but then, how do you live in light of it? You don't want any kind of generic kind of spirituality. You develop your own personal spirituality, your connection with the spirit. It's got to be personal. It doesn't mean it's better or worse than anybody else. It doesn't mean it's separate for anybody else, because here we all are. We're with one another, but nobody in this group is the authority. This group is about helping one another, helping the people who are here discover their own truth. Now, when you're heading towards a mature spirituality, this is the last thing we're talking about, and hopefully that you don't get it in the first half of life. Be very rare to do that. But if in the second half of life, if you're starting to get into a mature spirituality, first of all, it will ask you to be larger than you want to be. That's definitely part of when you get into a mature spirituality in the second half of life. It will ask you to be larger than your ego wants to be. Your ego wants to keep everything status quo. It asks you to grow. It asks you to leave the baby shoes and get yourself a pair of Birkenstocks that fit, that you can grow into, you see. That's the first thing. And so there's a clash of selves involved here, because your ego self doesn't want to change anything. He wants to go on as you are, even if as you are is, you're the life is dreadful, but at least I know it. It's fighting tooth and nail to stop you. But a mature spirituality asks you to be larger than you want to be. That's always a part of it. And the second thing of a mature spirituality is it will not provide you answers. Everybody thinks it will. I thought it would. I thought of guys who are 71 like I am and going gray that they got some answers. No, sorry about that. It provides you with bigger questions. That is the real paradox of this. You think enlightenment, everything will be answered. Well, that's just not my experience. It wasn't Merton's experience, not the Dalai Lama's experience. These are guys who are telling you about it. No, it provides you with bigger, deeper questions. And as Rilke says, Rilke was a guy in the second half of life, big time. And he said, have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and learn to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books in a very foreign language. It's how it seems sometimes. And then he says something that's unbelievable in the age of Google. He says, do not search for answers. that's like, I don't know, and Google is great for, large fries or smalls issues, but you can't Google who am I? You can't Google, you know, these questions that come in the second half of life. He says, do not search for answers which could not be given to you now because you could not live them. And the point is to live everything. Okay, so you live with these questions. That's the whole point of a mature spirituality. You hold them, you sit with them. You just don't search for the answers. And then he says, if you can do this at some point in the future, without ever realizing it, you will have lived your way into the answer. And I can say that's true from my own experience. Rilke knows what he's talking about there. But the searching for the answers is up here. This is the search mechanism. This is the Google thing. That's fine for, you know, facts and stuff that you need, and it would be helpful. I mean, how many ounces in a cup? I forget all that kind of stuff all the time. You can ask Alexa, hey, Alexa, how many ounces in a cup? She'll tell you. That's helpful. You can't ask her, am I related to something infinite or not? Try it. Maybe she's got something there. Maybe she's been upgraded. But see, you can't do that. And so in this, going into this darkness in a way, darkness just means you've given up trying to Google all this stuff. You're giving up trying to think your way through the second half of life. Then what do you rely on? And this is just the last thing I want to talk about. And then we'll have a break where you can reflect on this a little bit, and then we'll come back and do a couple of sittings. What do you rely on? If you realize this is only good for first half of life issues, survival issues, practical issues, and so you don't try to get rid of it, but you just know for this phase of life I'm going to have to rely on something else when the chips are down, and that's the operation of the heart. And what is that? It's like this. It's like you're listening to life now, and you're in a kind of total awareness of life in the road, and things happen that actually resonate, just like when the striker hits the bell. And so you're operating a whole other system. Yeah, I resonate with that. Then you trust that. This is always spinning, telling you to do, go left, go left. It's safe there, it's safe there, it's safe there. And then, but something deeper starts in the beginning. You can't even hardly hear it. It's not like a Big Ben bell. But if you really listen, that's why listening becomes, listen, listening, because it's faint at first, this resonant. No, that path feels right. That I resonate with that. Trust in that is what the second half of life is trying to teach you. So for when we come back and we ring the bell, that's why bells are a part of this whole thing. We ring the bell and then we just drop into the silence, into the depths, to be with whatever we meet there, the deepest thing. And then the silence is there so we can listen for those resonances. See, it's a whole other way to live. That's why some form of meditation comes up in the second half of life. I started meditating when I was 21 because I was so stressed out, and it did help. But that's not the deepest level of meditation. Meditation is to listen to how to proceed, and the road changes. So that's why the Buddha kept sitting for 40 years after he had his first breakthrough. It wasn't like, all right, one and done. It doesn't work that way. He kept sitting. He kept sitting and listening and resonating because he had everything popping up in his life just as Jesus did or anybody else. So he kept sitting to listen deeply for what resonated and what didn't. And then you follow the heart. If you're trying to live a life half-heartedness or there's no heart in it at all, that's usually an indication it's It's time to move on, you see. Well, this gives you a little idea. Uh, the sacred dance, it calls to all of us. Some of us are doing it already. Well, you're happier if you are. Well, all right. Well, we're going to take a break. We'll be back at 10:15, uh, and 15 after the hour, where whatever time it is there. We'll be back in about 13 minutes, and then we'll do some sitting, some listening, some resonating. And believe me, you all have these kinds of questions. And if you can go and get silent, you can hear what's resonating, what isn't. You know. All right. See you in a bit.